Morning to everyone. My name is Enrico Zimuel. I work for Zend Technologies in the R&D department. I am one of the core contributors of Zend Framework and Agility. Before to join Zend, I was a research programmer at the Amsterdam University. And I'm also the co-founder of the PHP user group of Torino in Italy, the city where actually I live. And I work remotely because my colleagues are based in US. Okay, so let's start the presentation. Of course, we are going to talk about the future of Zend Framework, so Zend Framework 3. Before to start, I would like to know how many of you used Zend Framework 1? Please raise your hand. Zend Framework 2? Okay. So, Zend Framework 3. We want to create a framework that is based on components. We want to focus on HTTP and actually PSR 7 standard that was proposed by Matthew, that is the team leader of Zend Framework and Agility, and middleware. So this is basically the new approach for building a web application. We want to create a code that is optimized for PHP 7, but of course we want to support also PHP 5, and the minimum version will be 5.5, because for good reason. I mean 5.4, the end of life is very close, so it makes no sense to release a new framework based on a PHP version that is not supported anymore. And the more important stuff is the last point of the slide, the stable release. So our goal is to release Zend Framework 3 in October this year. So it's not a lot of time, so we are working very hard. And actually, if you want to contribute to the framework, you are more than welcome. Okay, so I mentioned that we want to focus on components. What means? Basically, that means that just a brief history about the components. So in Zend Framework 1, we had a very giant framework, so a giant set of library. So if you want to use just one component in Zend Framework 1, actually you have to download and install the entire framework. There is no way to support easily this kind of usage. So that is quite bad. And we provided actually in Zend Framework 2 a different approach. So Zend Framework 2 is, as you know, even an entire library, entire framework. But if you want, you can install individually. So you can pick up you can select some specific components and install using, of course, Composer. Because basically what we did is a trick. Actually, every time we deploy something, we commit something in the main repository of Zend Framework 2, we have a script that basically copy the specific components in a separate repository. So you can use Composer to install it. Of course, this is, as I mentioned, an hack, and we want to move with a very unique repository for each component. And actually, we are going to do that before the release of Zend Framework 3. So our goal is to release in the next weeks the Zend Framework 2.5, where we'll have the separation of the components in a specific repository. So basically, you can install individually the components, and Zend Framework repository will depend on these components. So will become like a meta package that collects the specific components. So will be in a couple of weeks the composer.json structure of Zend Framework. So as you can see, we are going to naming the components with the Zend, dash and the name of components with the specific version. That means there are a lot of advantages doing that, because you can pick up specific and different actually version for specific components. That means you can in some way have your specific package version for the framework, and it's actually very good because it's more open for specific use cases. Why? As I mentioned it, because if we split in components, we can even maintain more easily the components. We can have a specific team, specific people that follow the maintenance of the specific components repository instead of have one giant repository. So if you think about issue management, pull requests, and so on, that will solve a lot of our problem actually, because if I log in my GitHub account, I see 2K pull request issue is quite impossible to manage by one person. So that's the main, actually the main reason. And also another reason is Darwin reason, selective evolution. I mean, if we are splitting the components in a specific repository, and if one component is stable enough or is not more used anymore, we can select which one to provide support in the future. So it's also for us a good way to check sorry, the statistic of the usage of the specific components. So we can select which one is more prominent for the future. And of course, as I mentioned, if you have the ability to choose specific components, specific version of the framework, you can use just the components for your specific use case. For instance, if you are building web services, maybe you don't need the entire MVC, components of Zend Framework. You can just have, specific components to manage, for instance, JSON, REST protocol, and so on. If you need performance, if you want to build a very custom application, specific application, you can just pick up a couple of components, and we also hope that the community will invent new micro frameworks based on the components of the framework. So we are trying to open our door in this direction. Of course, if you need everything, you can just select the entire components. And we want to provide, of course, some skeleton, so some example, basically, where you can start, for instance, to building a RESTful API, specific web services, even an MVC application. So we will provide different examples so you can start with something and not from scratch, of course. So, yeah, I already mentioned the advantages of the components. The second main aspect and the main feature of the Framework 3 will be the HTTP support, and actually the usage of PSR7. How many of you already knows about PSR7? Raise your hand. Okay. And of course, the goal is to have also the support of middleware. This is a new design, not new, a different design approach in building web application. We know that HTTP is basically the foundation of the web. It's very simple. The idea: a client, a browser sends a request, and the server returns a response. HTTP message, we know, is basically a text like that. You have the HTTP methods, the path, the version, and a set of headers that is, key and value. The response is the version of the HTTP, the status, and a couple of headers and the body. So that's it. So when we talk about web application, we need to focus on that. And actually, even the language that we are using, PHP, is not really focused on this kind of paradigm. So we have this kind of global variables that help people to to pick up data from the HTTP request and response, but really the language is not modeled around this, this design. This, of course, for historical reason, because when PHP was born, was basically a CGI approach, so was not really focused on that. And that is the goal of the PSR7. So try to standardize the way to manage the HTTP request and response. Because if you look right now, if you pick some random PHP frameworks, every framework has the specific method, the specific function to manage the HTTP request and response. For instance, you can have, to get the method of the HTTP request, you can have, I don't know, get method, get request method, or method. So everyone managed in a different way. The goal of PSR7, as I mentioned, is to standardize this approach. And actually, is just a set of interface that we collected with all the team leader of all the PHP projects. And finally, we get a standard. So if you want to get a method, you will have to implement basically this get method function. The header, get header, get URI, get path. As you can see, it's very verbose. I mean, it's basically English. It's not so complicated. And to manage the response, you have stuff like get body, write to the body. You can specify the status, the header. You can add header. So it's very fluent, the interface. If you are interested, I strongly suggest to have a look at the PSR7 implementation. Specification, because you have to implement the specification of the interface, actually. So, of course, because basically we proposed the PSR7, we are going to support the PSR7 in Zend Framework 3, but we are still discussing about how to do that, because as I mentioned, you have to implement based according to the interface. Of course, we are consuming directly, so we are implementing the interfaces. But we want also to create some kind of bridge, because our goal is to be able even to execute old Zend Framework 2 application in a Zend Framework style, so using a middleware. So our goal is to don't do the same mistake that we did passing from Zend Framework 1 to Zend Framework 2. We said, okay, we are rebuilding from scratch everything, and if you want to migrate from Zend Framework 1 to Zend Framework 2, I mean, it's not so easy. How many of you have tried to, or actually migrated how was it? Quite a nightmare, yeah? Okay. Okay, so basically, because we are opening and we are consuming a new standard, we want to find a nice way to switch and to support the backward compatibility, basically. Talking about middleware, middleware is, as I mentioned, a design approach to build application, HTTP application, and you have basically to manage a request and a response. So that's it. And of course, you have to return a response. So nothing complicated. There are basically 3 different types of approach in designing a middleware application. The first is stack or pipelines. And actually, this is one of our, and actually even my favorite approach. So we are going basically to build Zend Framework 3 using this, this approach. And as you can see, basically we are just using a pipe as the Linux pipe. So we are just in the same, using the same idea. We are injecting stuff in the pipeline of execution. So you have to imagine that a middleware application is just a set of pipeline, so you can just inject what you want to add to the execution. And as you can see, we can inject stuff that are always executed in the pipeline, or executed when the request is a specific path. And there will be, of course, at the end, some run function to execute the flow. So this is one approach. Another is the onion style. It's based on a more object-oriented way. So basically, you have a class, and you have an invoke. Here is a magic PHP function that manages a request and a response, and you're just executing internal function of these components and returning a response. So nothing different. I mean, it's just more object oriented with a PHP trick here, because this invoke, of course. And the last way to design a middleware is using Lambda, so anonymous function. So basically, you have a request, you execute some anonymous function, and you get a response. So even here, nothing so exciting. So as I mentioned, we want to consume middleware in Zend Framework. So our goal is to build basically controllers, Zend Framework controller, that are open to middleware. That means you can execute a controller using this request and response interface. And we want also to be able to execute previous, as I mentioned, Zend Framework 2 application in Zend Framework 3 style. So the idea basically is to provide, this is a just some random code that I wrote on this slide. We have to implement this actually. So this is just the idea. So I'm sharing with you our internals basically. Anyway, the goal is to provide a component like MVC middleware wrapper, where you can pass when you create the object, the configuration, and if you use it Zend Framework 2, basically we are injecting the configuration of an application. And we want to consume the middleware using basically a kind of onion style here, because we are injecting the request and response in all the function basically, and we are mimicking in some way the index.php file. So if you open the index.php file of Zend Framework 2, you will see that in some way we are initializing the application, consuming the configuration and executing it. So in using this kind of approach, basically you will be able to execute all Zend Framework 2 application consuming Zend Framework 3 new layer. Why we are focusing on middleware? Middleware, as already mentioned, is not a new design. It's quite known in computer science, but we basically want to support it for 3 reasons. For performance, because if you need to write specific custom application, like for instance API, using middleware is quite convenient because you don't have to run the entire framework, just specific components, so performance are very great. The second point is for developer experience. So we noticed that Zend Framework 2 was not so easy to start to use it, even because the documentation was not enough to cover all the use cases, because it's quite big framework. But a lot of developers, a lot of comments and feedback that we received was, very nice, very well designed, very open, but it's quite hard for me to start to use it. So the learning curve is quite high of Zend Framework 2. So we want to to solve this problem, and actually using middleware, like for instance a lot of other frameworks like Laravel use the same approach, and is quite successful. So we want to, open and simplify the usage at the beginning for the beginner, And this is actually the most important part, because we, we really enjoy the PSR7 specification, the standard. We are convinced that this standard will open the door to the other frameworks. So imagine that every framework is PSR7 compliant. the future will be amazing because you can create an application based on specific different frameworks using the same approach. You don't have to each time to understand the flow of the framework, a specific framework, if it's MVCs, if middleware, or whatever. You just write your application using this middleware approach, and you are just consuming a different framework. So it will be very, very nice. This is an example of the future, let's put in this way. So imagine that you have an application based on middleware, so PSR7 standard, and you can just, you have some static pages for the home page. You have a Zend Framework 2 application when the browser requests /customer. You can have a Zend Framework 1 application because our goal is also to support Zend Framework 1 in the same style of Zend Framework 2, so using a specific middleware bridge. For instance, you have an API, so /API will solve in AppAgility, or you can have a different, framework in, for instance, /user, and this is completely different framework. So it will be very, very nice to have something like that. So this is like a dream, no? I have a dream to see in the future PHP application like that. Okay, the last goal of Zend Framework 3 is to support PHP 5.5, but we want to look to the future, so we want to optimize our code even for PHP 7. So why we want to use PHP 5.5? I mentioned that 5.4 is very close to the deadline, so it makes no sense, but using 5.5, we can use traits in our framework. We can use short array syntax. This is very nice for us because, as you know, Zend Framework uses PHP 5 for configuration. So instead of array, you just have bracket square. So it's quite more readable, more easy to write and to understand the configuration. We will use callable type hint, we can use finally, we can use the class magic constant, we can use generator, of course, and more secure PHP version. So that's is quite important. But I also say that we are going to optimize our code in PHP 7. Why? Because PHP 7 we will have incredible performance improvement. Because basically the data structure of the internals of PHP is completely rewritten from scratch. And of course, there are some nice features like return and scalar type declaration that, in my opinion, can all the application can benefit from this new, feature because you can write application with more constraint. If you write something, a function that accepts an integer, you can say, okay, this must be an integer, not a string that is auto-converted in some nasty way from PHP and so on. Because a lot of bugs, a lot of issue comes from this, elasticity of PHP. That sometimes is good if you really know what you are doing, but if you are not so good in the internals of PHP, you can expect very nasty behavior. So I think it's important to have this kind of stuff. Of course, we cannot use it in the framework, but we have also some idea how to, for instance, this is another dream, the second dream. Imagine that you have a Zend Framework 3 application and you have some, command line that is able to get your source code and translate in PHP 7 using the PHP doc. If you write your function, your class using PHP doc, you can specify the type of parameter in and the type of return. So we are even thinking to create some command line that are able to generate PHP 7 compliant source code. But this is, as I mentioned, as a dream. So we'll see if it will happen. Why? I mentioned that PHP 7 is very fast. Just to give you some idea, this is a benchmark done by Dimitri, as my colleague in Zend, one of the core contributors of PHP. So imagine that you have this simple code that generates 1 million of elements, so an array of 1 million of elements, and each element is another array. So very, very simple. We are just creating the array and getting the memory. So if you're using PHP 5.6, the memory usage is 4 to 8 megabytes, 400 megabytes. With PHP 7 will be 33 megabytes. So it's quite impressive. Even the execution time, almost half a second with the PHP 5.6, at basically 0.06 seconds in PHP 7. So this is thanks to the change of the internal of PHP, because the data management, as I mentioned, has completely rewritten from scratch. If you execute the bench.php, that is a benchmark file that you can have when you install the PHP using the source code. So there is this script that basically executes the internal, some function of PHP. Here I reported basically a lot of even very old version of PHP 4.4 and also HHVM. So as you can see, HHVM using bench PHP is the fastest one. PHP 7 is, if you compare with 5.6, we passed from 1.92 from 1.25, so it's quite good. And of course, HVM is faster because it's compiled code, so it's much faster. So this is an interesting benchmark. And now I show another benchmark using WordPress, so a real case application. It's very nice to see that the difference between PHP 7 and HVM actually is not so different. I mean, are very close. So if I go back here, benchmarking real PHP, as I can say, just function of PHP, we see that the gap is quite big, but in real use cases, the gap is not so big. So this is also important when you see benchmark around the web. So we see a lot of people that say, okay, now I write blog posts about benchmarking PHP frameworks. He took the hello world of PHP frameworks and execute Apache benchmark even without any statistical indicator like the average, the deviation standard, just grabbing random data and he put on the web, and a lot of people say, oh, okay, Zend Framework is very slow compared with Symfony or compared with Laravel, blah, 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 blah. Make no sense. If you want to do a real benchmark, you have to use real use cases. If you are just benchmarking Hello World, I mean, if your goal is to write Hello World application, makes sense. But, Another interesting benchmark is about framework. So here I put PHP 5.6 in red, PHP 7 in gray, and HHVM in orange. We are benchmarking Zend Framework 1, Zend Framework 2, Drupal, Sugar CRM, Magento, and Symfony 2.5 with the SEM application, demo application. As you can see here, there are very, very interesting stuff. So in Zend Framework 1, the fastest is PHP 7, even in Zend Framework 2, and actually HHVM and PHP 5.6 for Zend Framework 2 are almost the same. This is very interesting results. Drupal, even on PHP 7, Sugar CRM. Magento is one of the, it's very close. Actually, it's because this graph is not in a logarithmic scale, so it's quite difficult to see the data here. But anyway, HHVM is faster on Magento. I don't know why. And even Symfony, the fastest is PHP 7. So that's the reason why we are optimizing. We want to optimize the framework 3 on PHP 7. How we can do that? Because we cannot use specific syntax of PHP 7 in Zend Framework 3. So our goal basically is to test in strict or coercive mode. So that means we will execute the syntax of PHP 5.5 using PHP 7. So when we deploy, when we test, we are using both engine. So we can see if in PHP 7 we have some kind of benefits from performance compared with PHP 5.5, we will go on that branch in the implementation. That's the goal of our schedule. And as I mentioned, potentially we can release some automatic build, some script that translate the PHP 5.5 and PHP 7 using, for instance, return scalar type and so on. But this is a very, science fiction dream, I would say. And of course, it's important to look to the future of PHP when we talk about framework implementation, because we can benefit from the security of the new version of PHP, the performance improvement, and so in some way we will improving the framework as well. So just to summarize, Zend Framework 3, we will focus on components, on HTTP, PSR 7 and middleware, and PHP 7 and PHP 5.5. So that's it. Thank you.
Hello, thanks for the talk. Do we know why PHP 7 have so better performance in some application or frameworks? Is it usage of array or some kind of design pattern? I don't know.
This is actually a very difficult question. I mean, that's why we need benchmark.
You said you try to optimize Zend Framework 3 for PHP 7?
Yeah.
But what kind of optimization?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, when we develop something, we have basically two environments, PHP 5.5 and PHP 7. So we want to be sure that the code is successful on PHP 5.5, of course, but at the same time we see using, for instance, Z-Ray, that is a nice feature of Zend server. You can inspect the execution code, the execution time, the memory usage, and so on. So if we see some possibility to improve the code in PHP 7, having the same PHP 5.5 execution successful, we will go on the PHP 7. I mean, for instance, data management, I don't know, execution of anonymous function in some parts, this kind of stuff. So the goal is to have two environments to check every time if there are possibility to investigate in PHP 7 execution. So that's the goal. Of course, we have to support PHP 5.5, so we cannot do a lot of stuff. But we want to be sure that on PHP 7, the optimization are, we prefer the optimization for the performance execution, of course, on PHP 7. That's the goal.
It's an experiment optimization, in fact.
Yes, it's just for performance, actually, okay, because we cannot change the syntax of the code. So just to look inside, because we are releasing a framework, Zend Framework 3, in October. PHP 7 is announced at the end of the year, so we are very, close to the release date. So we want to take the advantages to work on a new, even because we want to, as a geek person, nerd person, we want to experiment new stuff. So we invent this new approach.
Hi, I have a question regarding the component in Zend Framework 3. Was they completely independent from each other, or is there sometimes dependencies between each component?
Our goal is to reduce the dependencies at the minimum. So we want to release, standalone components, but I can say now that we will have some minimum dependencies, for instance, stuff like standard lib or very generic library, and of course HTTP. If you are building some MVC or middleware stuff, you are consuming the Zend HTTP client in some way. So we are trying to reduce the requirements, the dependency.
Thank you. For the middleware components, will it override the router configuration or so, or you had to configure routes also in the config file?
Actually, the idea is to provide both. We would like to provide basic, so you can basically write specific routes and inject in piping with the pipe components, so manually, actually. And even with consuming a configuration approach. So we are still discussing about that, but we want to support both.
Okay.
No more question? Okay. Thank you again.